Okay, loves. This next one's called Therinsford. And let's get going. Dawn was gray and overcast with a cutting wind. The forest was quiet. After a light breakfast, Brom and Eragon doused the fire and shouldered their packs, preparing to leave. Eragon hung his bow and quiver on the side of his pack where he could easily reach them. Saphira wore the saddle. She would have to carry it until they got horses. Eragon carefully tied Zarok onto her back, too, as he did not want the extra weight. Besides, in his hands, the sword would be no better than a club. Eragon had felt safe inside the bramble, but outside, weariness crept into his movements. Saphira took off and circled overhead. The trees thinned as they returned to the farm. I will see this place again, Eragon insisted to himself, looking at the ruined buildings. This will not be a permanent exile. Someday when it's safe, I'll return. Throwing back his shoulders, he faced south in the strange barbaric lands that lay there. Saphira veered west toward the mountains and out of sight. Eragon felt uncomfortable as he watched her go. Even now, with no one around, they could not spend their days together. She had to stay hidden in case they met a fellow traveler. The Razak's footprints were faint on the eroding snow, but Eragon was unconcerned. It was unlikely that they had forsaken the road, which was the easiest way out of the valley before the wilderness. Once outside the valley, however, the road divided in several places. It would be difficult to ascertain which branch the Razak had taken. They traveled in silence, concentrating on speed. Eragon's legs continued to bleed where the scabs had cracked. To take his mind off the discomfort, he asked, "So what exactly can dragons do? You said that you knew something of their abilities." Brom laughed, his sapphire ring flashing in the air as he gestured. "Unfortunately, it's a pitiful amount compared to what I would like to know. Your question is one people have been trying to answer for centuries. So understand that what I tell you is by its very nature incomplete. Dragons have always been mysterious, though maybe not on purpose. Before I can truly answer your question, you need a basic education on the subject of dragons. It's hopelessly confusing to start in the middle of such a complex topic without understanding the foundation on which it stands. I'll begin with the life cycle of dragons, and if that doesn't wear you out, we can continue to another topic." Brom explained how dragons mate and what it took for their eggs to hatch. "You see," he said, "when a dragon lays an egg, the infant inside is ready to hatch. But it waits, sometimes for years, for the right circumstances. When dragons lived in the wild, those circumstances were usually dictated by the availability of food. However, once they formed an alliance with the elves, a certain number of their eggs, usually no more than 1 or 2, were given to the riders each year. These eggs, or rather the infants inside, wouldn't hatch until the person destined to be its rider came into their presence, though how they sensed that isn't known. People used to line up to touch the eggs, hoping that one of them might be picked." "Do you mean that Saphira might not have hatched for me?" asked Eragon. "Quite possibly, if she hadn't liked you." He felt honored that all the people in Allegasia, she had chosen him. He wondered how long she had been waiting, then shuddered at the thought of being cramped inside an egg, surrounded by darkness. Brom continued his lecture. He explained what and when dragons ate. A fully grown sedentary dragon could go for months without food, but in mating season they had to eat every week. Some plants could heal their sicknesses, while others would make them ill. There were various ways to care for their claws and clean their scales. He explained the techniques to use when attacking from a dragon and what to do if you were fighting one, whether on foot, horseback, or with another dragon. Their bellies were armored, their armpits were not. Eragon constantly interrupted to ask questions, and Brom seemed pleased by the inquiries. Hours passed unheeded as they talked. When evening came, they were near Therinsford. As the sky darkened and they searched for a place to camp, Eragon asked, "Who was the rider that owned Zarok?" "A mighty warrior," said Brom, "who was much feared in his time and held great power." "What was his name?" "I'll not say." Eragon protested, but Brom was firm. "I don't want to keep you ignorant. Far from it, but certain knowledge would only prove dangerous and distracting for you right now. There isn't any reason for me to trouble you with such things until you have the time, and the power to deal with them. I only wish to protect you from those who would use you for evil." Eragon glared at him. "You know what? I think you just enjoy speaking in riddles. I have half a mind to leave you so I don't have to be bothered with them. If you're going to say something, then say it instead of dancing around with vague phrases." "Peace. All will be told in time," Brom said gently. Eragon grunted, unconvinced. They found a comfortable place to spend the night and set up camp. Saphira joined them as dinner was being set on the fire. "Did you have time to hunt for food?" asked Eragon. She snorted with amusement. "If the 2 of you were any slower, I would have time to fly across the sea and back without falling behind." "You don't have to be insulting. Besides, we'll go faster once we have horses." She let out a puff of smoke. "Maybe. But will it be enough to catch the Razak?" They have a lead of several days and many leagues, and I'm afraid they may suspect we're following them. Why else would they have destroyed the farm in such a spectacular manner unless they wish to provoke you into chasing them? I don't know, said Eragon, disturbed. Saphira curled up beside him, and he leaned against her belly, welcoming the warmth. Brom sat on the other side of the fire, whittling 2 long sticks. He suddenly threw one at Eragon, who grabbed it out of reflex as it whirled over the crackling flames. Defend yourself, barked Brom, standing. Eragon looked at the stick in his hand and saw that it was shaped in the crude likeness of a sword. Brom wanted to fight him? What chance did the old man stand? If he wants to play this game, so be it, but if he thinks to beat me, he's in for a surprise. He rose as Brom circled the fire. They faced each other for a moment, and then Brom charged, swinging his stick. Eragon tried to block the attack, but he was too slow. He yelped as Brom struck him on the ribs and stumbled backward. Without thinking, he lunged forward, but Brom easily parried the blow. Eragon whipped a stick towards Brom's head, twisted it at the last moment, and then tried to hit his side. The solid smack of wood striking wood resounded through the camp. "Improvisation! Good!" exclaimed Brom, eyes gleaming. His arm moved in a blur, and there was an explosion of pain on the side of Eragon's head. He collapsed like an empty sack, dazed. A splash of cold water roused him to alertness, and he sat up, sputtering. His head was ringing, and there was dried blood on his face. Brom stood over him with a pan of melted snow water. "You didn't have to do that," said Eragon angrily, pushing himself up. He felt dizzy and unsteady. Brom arched an eyebrow. "Oh? A real enemy wouldn't soften his blows, and neither will I. Should I pander to your incompetence so you'll feel better?" "I don't think so." He picked up the stick that Eragon had dropped and held it out. "Now defend yourself." Eragon stared blankly at the piece of wood, then shook his head. "Forget it. I've had enough." He turned away and stumbled as he was whacked loudly across the back. He spun around, growling. "Never turn your back on the enemy," snapped Brom, then tossed the stick at him and attacked. Eragon retreated around the fire beneath the onslaught. "Pull your arms in. Keep your knees bent," shouted Brom. He continued to give instructions, then paused to show Eragon exactly how to execute a certain move. "Do it again, but this time slowly." They slid through the forms with exaggerated motions before returning to their furious battle. Eragon learned quickly, but no matter what he tried, he could not hold Brom off for more than a few blows. When they finished, Eragon flopped onto his blankets and groaned. He hurt everywhere. Brom had not been gentle with his stick. Saphira let out a long, coughing growl and curled her lip until a formidable row of teeth showed. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded irritably. "Nothing," she replied. "It's funny to see a hatchling like you beaten by the old one." She made the sound again, and Eragon turned red as he realized that she was laughing. Trying to preserve some dignity, he rolled onto his side and fell asleep. He felt even worse the next day. Bruises covered his arms, and he was almost too sore to move. Brom looked up from the mush he was serving and grinned. "How do you feel?" Eragon grunted and bolted down the breakfast. Once on the road, they traveled swiftly so as to reach Therinsford before noon. After a league, the road widened and they saw smoke in the distance. "You'd better tell Saphira to fly ahead and wait for us on the other side of Therinsford," said Brom. "She has to be careful here, otherwise people are bound to notice her." "Why don't you tell her yourself?" challenged Eragon. "It's considered bad manners to interfere with another dragon." "You didn't have a problem with it in Carvajal." Brom's lips twitched with a smile. "I did what I had to do." Eragon eyed him darkly, then relayed the instructions. Saphira warned, "Be careful. The Empire servants could be hiding anywhere." As the ruts in the road deepened, Eragon noticed more farms signaled their approach to Therinsford. The village was larger than Carvajal, but it had been constructed haphazardly, the houses aligned in no particular order. "What a mess," said Eragon. He could not see Dumpton's mill. Balder and Albrecht have surely fetched Roran by now. Either way, Eragon had no wish to face his cousin. "It's ugly, if nothing else," agreed Brom. The Enora River flowed between them and the town, spanned by a stout bridge. As they approached it, a greasy man stepped out from a bush and barred their way. His shirt was too short, and his dirty stomach spilled over a rope belt. Behind his cracked lips, his teeth looked like tombstones. "You can stop right there. This is my bridge. Gotta pay to get over it." "How much?" asked Brom in a resigned voice. He pulled out a pouch, and the bridgekeeper brightened. 5 crowns, he said, pulling his lips into a broad smile. Eragon's temper flared at the exorbitant price, and he started to complain hotly. But Brom signed him with a quick look. The coins were wordlessly handed over. The man put them into a sack hanging from his belt. "Thank you much," he said in a mocking tone, and stood out of the way. As Brom stepped forward, he stumbled and caught the bridgekeeper's arm to support himself. "Watch your step," snarled the grimy man, sidling away. "Sorry," apologized Brom, and continued over the bridge with Eragon. "Why didn't you haggle? He skinned you alive, exclaimed Eragon when they were out of earshot. He probably doesn't even own the bridge. We could have pushed right past him. Probably, agreed Brom. Then why pay him? Because you can't argue with all the fools of the world. It's easier to let them have their way than trick them when they're not paying attention. Brom opened his hand and a pile of coins glinted in the light. You stole those, exclaimed Eragon, incredulous. Brom pocketed the money with a wink. Anyone who gulls innocent travelers for a living ought to know better than to carry such a large sum on his person. Come, let us be off before our greedy friend realizes what has happened. If you see any watchmen wandering around, tell me. He grabbed the shoulder of a young boy running between the houses and asked, Do you know where we can buy horses? The child stared at them with solemn eyes and then pointed to a large barn near the edge of Therinsford. Thank you, said Brom, tossing him half a coin. The barn's large double doors were open, revealing 2 long rows of stalls. The far wall was covered with saddles, harnesses, and other paraphernalia. A man with muscular arms stood at the end, brushing a white stallion. He raised a hand and beckoned for them to come over. As they approached, Brom said, That's a beautiful animal. Yes, indeed. His name's Snowfire. Mine's Hayberth. Hayberth offered a rough palm and shook hands vigorously with Eragon and Brom. There was a polite pause as he waited for their names in return. When they were not forthcoming, he asked, Can I help you? Brom nodded. We need 2 horses and a full set attack for both. The horses have to be fast and tough. We'll be doing a lot of traveling. Hayberth was thoughtful for a moment. I don't have many animals like that, and the ones I do aren't cheap. The stallion moved restlessly. He calmed it with a few strokes of his fingers. Price is no object. I'll take the best you have, said Brom. Hayberth nodded and silently tied the stallion to a wall. He went to the wall and started pulling down saddles and other items. Soon he had 2 identical piles. Next he walked up the line of stalls and brought out 2 horses. One was a light bay, the other a roan. The bay tugged against his rope. He's a little spirited, but with a firm hand he won't have any problems, said Hayberth, handing the bay's rope to Brom. Brom let the horse smell his hand. It allowed him to rub his neck. We'll take him, he said, then eyed the roan. The other one, however, I'm not so sure of. There are some good legs on him. What will you take for Snowfire? Hayberth looked fondly at the stallion. I'd rather not sell him. He's the finest I've ever bred. I'm hoping to sire a whole line from him. If you were willing to part with him, how much would all of this cost me? Asked Brom. Eragon tried to put his hand on the bay like Brom had, but it shied away. He automatically reached out with his mind to reassure the horse, stiffening with surprise as he touched the animal's consciousness. The contact was not clear or sharp like it was with Saphira, but he could communicate with the bay to a limited degree. Tentatively, he made it understand that he was a friend. The horse calmed and looked at him with liquid brown eyes. Hayberth used his fingers to add up the price of the purchase. 200 crowns, and no less, he said with a smile, clearly confident that no one would pay that much. Brom silently opened his pouch and counted out the money. Will this do? He asked. There was a long silence as Hayberth glanced between Snowfire and the coins. A sigh, then, He is yours, though I go against my heart. I will treat him as if he had been sired by a Gildentor, the greatest steed of legend, said Brom. Your words gladden me, answered Hayberth, bowing his head slightly. He helped them saddle the horses. When they were ready to leave, he said, Farewell, then. For the sake of Snowfire, I hope that misfortune does not befall you. Do not fear. I will guard him well, promised Brom as they departed. Here, he said, handing Snowfire's reins to Eragon. Go to the far side of Therinsford and wait there. Why? Asked Eragon, but Brom had already slipped away. Annoyed, he exited Therinsford with the 2 horses and stationed himself beside the road. To the south, he saw the hazy outline of Utgard, sitting like a giant monolith at the end of the valley. Its peak pierced the clouds and rose out of sight, towering over the lesser mountains that surrounded it. Its dark, ominous look made Eragon's scalp tingle. Brom returned shortly and gestured for Eragon to follow. They walked until Therinsford was hidden by trees. Then Brom said, The Razak definitely passed this way. Apparently they stopped here to pick up horses, as we did. I was able to find a man who saw them. He described them with many shudders and said that they galloped out of Therinsford like demons fleeing a holy man. They left quite an impression. Quite. Eragon patted the horses. When we were in the barn, I touched the bays by accident. I didn't know it was possible to do that. Brom frowned. It's unusual for one as young as you to have that ability. Most riders had to train for years before they were strong enough to contact anything other than their dragon. His face was thoughtful as he inspected Snowfire. Then he said, Take everything from your pack, put it into the saddlebags, and tie the pack on top. Eragon did so while Brom mounted Snowfire. Eragon gazed doubtfully at the bay. It was so much smaller than Saphira that for an absurd moment if it could bear his weight. With a sigh, he awkwardly got into the saddle. He'd only ridden horses bareback and never for any distance. Is this going to do the same thing to my legs as riding Saphira? He asked. How do they feel now? Not too bad, but I think any hard riding will open them up again. We'll take it easy, promised Brom. He gave Eragon a few pointers, then they started off at a gentle pace. Before long, the countryside began to change as cultivated fields yielded to wilder land. Brambles and tangled weeds lined the road, along with huge rose bushes that clung to their clothes. Tall rocks slanted out of the ground, gray with winds. There was an unfriendly feel in the air, an animosity that resisted intruders. Above them, growing larger with every step, loomed Utgard, its craggy precipices deeply furrowed with snowy canyons. The black rock of the mountain absorbed light like a sponge and dimmed the surrounding area. Between Utgard and the line of mountains that formed the east side of Palancar Valley was a deep cleft. It was the only practical way out of the valley. The road led toward it. The horses' hooves clacked sharply over gravel, and the road dwindled to a skinny trail as it skirted the base of Utgard. Eragon glanced up at the peak looming over them, and was startled to see a steepled tower perched upon it. The turret was crumbling and in disrepair, but it was still a stern sentinel over the valley. What is that? He asked, pointing. Brom did not look up, but said sadly and with bitterness, an outpost of the riders, one that has lasted since their founding. That was where Vrail took refuge, and where, through treachery, he was found and defeated by Galbatorix. When Vrail fell, this area was tainted. Edoxil, unconquerable, was the name of this bastion, for the mountain is so steep none may reach the top unless they can fly. After Vrail's death, the commoners called it Utgard, but it is another name, Ristvak, the place of sorrow. It was known as such to the last riders before they were killed by the king. Eragon stared with awe. Here was a tangible remnant of the riders' glory, tarnished though it was by the relentless pull of time. It struck him just then how old the riders were. A legacy of tradition and heroism that stretched back to antiquity had fallen upon him. They traveled for long hours around Utgard. It formed a solid wall to their right as they entered the breach that divided the mountain range. Eragon stood in his stirrups. He was too impatient to see what lay outside of Palancar, but it was still too far away. For a while they were in a sloped pass, winding over hill and gully, following the Anora River. Then, with the sun low behind their backs, they mounted a rise and saw over the trees. Eragon gasped. On either side were mountains, but below them stretched a huge plain that extended to the east horizon and fused into the sky. The plain was a uniform tan, like the color of dead grass. Long, wispy clouds swept by overhead, shaped by fierce winds. He understood now why Brom had insisted on horses. It would have taken them weeks or months to cover that vast distance on foot. Far above, he saw Saphira circling, high enough to be mistaken for a bird. We'll wait until tomorrow to make the descent, said Brom. It's going to take most of the day, so we should camp now. How far across is the plain? Eragon asked, still amazed. 2 or 3 days to over a fortnight, depending on which direction we go. Aside from the nomad tribes that roam this section of the plains, it's almost as uninhabited as the Hatterack Desert to the east. So we aren't going to find many villages. However, to the south the plains are less arid and more heavily populated. They left the trail and dismounted by the Anora River. As they unsaddled the horses, Brom gestured at the bay. You should name him. Eragon considered it as he picketed the bay. Well, I don't have anything as noble as Snowfire, but maybe this will do. He placed his hand on the bay and said, I name you Kadok. It was my grandfather's name, so bear it well. Brom nodded in approval, but Eragon felt slightly foolish. When Saphira landed, he asked, how do the plains look? Dull. There's nothing but rabbits and scrub in every direction. After dinner, Brom stood and barked, Catch! Eragon barely had time to raise his arm and grab the piece of wood before it hit him on the head. He groaned as he saw another makeshift sword. Not again, he complained. Brom just smiled and beckoned with one hand. Eragon reluctantly got to his feet. They whirled around in a flurry of smacking wood, and he backed away with a stinging arm. The training session was shorter than the first, but it was still long enough for Eragon to amass a new collection of bruises. When they finished sparring, he threw down the stick in disgust and stalked away from the fire to nurse his injuries. That's the end of this one. We'll see you next time, lovelies.